Question 1. Examination of the data shows that a document originating from seller instructs buyer to pay a specified sum of money to bank immediately upon presentation. In Alabama, how should this instrument be classified for purposes of commercial paper law? Option A. A sight draft payable on demand upon presentation. Option B. A trade acceptance drawn on a merchant and accepted. Option C. A time draft payable at a future date. Option D. A promissory note representing a promise to pay. The correct answer is A. A sight draft payable on demand upon presentation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires distinguishing between different types of negotiable instruments, specifically drafts, under Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code, UC, Article 3. Misidentifying a draft can lead to incorrect legal assumptions about when payment is due, who is liable, and the procedures for presentment and dishonor. This ambiguity can create significant financial and legal risks for all parties involved. Careful judgment is required to apply the correct legal definitions to the factual circumstances. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to correctly identify the instrument as a sight draft. A sight draft is a type of draft that is payable immediately upon presentation to the drawee. Under Alabama UCC Section 3-108, A. A draft is payable on demand if it states that it is payable on sight, or when presented, or if it otherwise indicates that it is payable immediately upon presentment. The scenario clearly states the instrument is payable upon presentation, which is the defining characteristic of a sight draft. This immediate payability dictates the legal obligations and timelines for acceptance and payment. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to classify the instrument as a time draft solely because it is presented for payment. A time draft, as defined by Alabama UCC Section 3-108b, is payable at a definite time or at any time that is readily ascertainable in the future. If the instrument stated a future date for payment or a period after a specific event, e.g., 30 days after date, it would be a time draft. Treating a sight draft as a time draft would incorrectly delay the expectation of payment and potentially lead to a wrongful dishonor claim if payment is not made promptly upon presentation. Another incorrect approach is to consider the instrument a promissory note. Promissory note, under Alabama UCC Section 3-104e, is a promise to pay, not an order to pay. It is typically made by one party, the maker, to another, the payee. A draft, conversely, involves an order from a drawer to a drawee to pay a payee. The instrument in the scenario is an order from seller, drawer, to buyer, drawee, to pay bank, payee, clearly indicating it is a draft, not a note. Misclassifying it as a note would ignore the fundamental structure and legal implications of an order to pay. A further incorrect approach is to assume the instrument is a trade acceptance without further information. While a trade acceptance is a type of draft, it has specific characteristics under Alabama UCC Section 3-104f, which require it to be a draft drawn on a merchant and accepted by that merchant. The scenario does not provide information that the buyer is a merchant or that the instrument has been accepted in the manner required for a trade acceptance. Treating it as such without meeting these specific criteria would be an unsupported assumption and could lead to incorrect legal conclusions regarding its negotiability and enforceability. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by meticulously examining the language of the instrument itself. The key is to identify whether it contains an order to pay draft or a promise to pay note, and if it is a draft, to determine the timing of payment, on demand/sight, or at a definite time. Consulting the relevant sections of Alabama's UCC Article 3 is crucial for accurate classification. This systematic approach ensures that legal rights and obligations are correctly understood and acted upon, preventing potential disputes and financial losses. Question 2. Upon reviewing a document presented for endorsement and transfer in Birmingham, Alabama, a financial advisor must determine if it qualifies as a negotiable instrument under Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code, Article 3. The document, dated January 15, 2023, states, I, John Doe, promise to pay Jane Smith the sum of $5,000, $5,000,000, upon the successful completion of the construction project at 123 Main Street, Birmingham, Al, or upon the expiration of 1 year from the date of this agreement, whichever occurs first. This payment is contingent upon Jane Smith providing all necessary permits and inspections. The document is signed by John Doe, Which of the following assessments most accurately reflects the document's negotiability under Alabama law? Option A. The document is a negotiable instrument because it is payable at a definite time, either upon project completion or within 1 year. Option B. The document is not a negotiable instrument because the promise to pay is conditional upon the successful completion of a construction project and the provision of permits and inspections, violating the unconditional promise or order requirement. Option C. The document is a negotiable instrument because it is in writing, signed, and specifies a fixed amount of money to be paid. Option D. The document is a negotiable instrument because it is signed by the maker and clearly identifies the payee. The correct answer is B. The document is not a negotiable instrument because the promise to pay is conditional upon the successful completion of a construction project and the provision of permits and inspections, violating the unconditional promise or order requirement. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge because it requires a thorough understanding of the specific elements that render a document a negotiable instrument under Alabama law, particularly UCC Article 3. Misinterpreting these elements can lead to incorrect legal conclusions about the enforceability and transferability of the instrument, impacting financial transactions and potentially leading to disputes. The professional must exercise careful judgment to distinguish between a simple contract and a negotiable instrument. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach is to meticulously examine the document against each of the 6 statutory requirements for negotiability under Alabama's UCC Article 3. This involves verifying that the document is in writing, signed by the maker or drawer, contains an unconditional promise or order to pay a fixed amount of money, and is payable on demand or at a definite time, and is payable to order or to bearer. This systematic evaluation ensures that all legal prerequisites are met, thereby correctly identifying the document as a negotiable instrument or not. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume negotiability based solely on the presence of a sum of money and a signature. This fails to account for the crucial requirements of an unconditional promise or order, a fixed amount, and the specific payable to order or bearer language mandated by Alabama UCC Section 7-3-104. Such an assumption overlooks the statutory framework designed to ensure certainty and predictability in commercial paper. Another incorrect approach is to focus only on whether the document is in writing and signed, while neglecting the payment terms. For instance, if the document contains conditions or contingencies for payment, it cannot be a negotiable instrument, even if it is written and signed. Alabama UCC Section 7-3-106 explicitly states that a promise or order is conditional if it states an obligation to do any act in addition to the payment of money, or if it is subject to any undertaking in the same writing. A further incorrect approach is to overlook the payable to order or bearer requirement. If the instrument is payable only to a specific named payee without the words order or bearer or equivalent language, it is not a negotiable instrument under Alabama law, even if all other conditions are met. This requirement is fundamental to the free transferability characteristic of negotiable instruments. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by adopting a checklist mentality, systematically applying the statutory tests for negotiability. This involves a detailed review of the document against each element defined in Alabama UCC Article 3. When in doubt, it is prudent to consult legal counsel or relevant statutory provisions to ensure accurate classification and avoid potential legal ramifications. The goal is to achieve certainty and compliance with the established legal framework for commercial paper. Question 3. When evaluating a document presented in Alabama that states, I, Sarah Miller, promised to pay John Smith the sum of $5,000, $5,000,000 on demand, and Sarah Miller has signed below this promise, what is the correct classification of the roles of Sarah Miller and John Smith in relation to this instrument under Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code Article 3? Option A. Sarah Miller is the maker, and John Smith is the payee. Option B. John Smith is the maker and Sarah Miller is the payee. Option C. The instrument is invalid because the payee's signature is not on the maker's line. Option D. The instrument is a check because it involves a promise to pay. Correct answer is A. Sarah Miller is the maker and John Smith is the payee. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential misrepresentation of a party's role in a negotiable instrument, which can have significant legal and financial consequences. Determining the true intent and legal standing of the parties requires a careful understanding of Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code, UC, as adopted in Alabama, specifically Article 3 concerning negotiable instruments. Misinterpreting the roles of the maker and payee can lead to disputes over liability, enforceability, and the rights of subsequent holders. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach is to recognize that the document, as written, clearly designates Sarah Miller as the maker, as she is the one promising to pay. The designation of John Smith as the payee indicates he is the intended recipient of the payment. Therefore, the instrument is a promissory note where Sarah Miller is the maker and John Smith is the payee. This aligns directly with Alabama UCC Section 75-3-104, which defines a negotiable instrument, and specifically the roles of maker and payee in a note. The maker is the party who promises to pay, and the payee is the party to whom payment is promised. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that because John Smith is the one presenting the note for payment, he must be the maker. This fails to recognize that the UCC defines the maker by the promise to pay, not by the act of presentment. This approach ignores the explicit language of the instrument and the definitions provided by Alabama UCC Section 75-3-104. Another incorrect approach is to consider the instrument invalid because the payee's signature is not on the maker line. The UCC does not require the payee to sign on the maker's line for the instrument to be valid as a promissory note. The payee's signature is typically required for endorsement to transfer rights, not to establish their role as payee. This approach misunderstands the distinct functions of the maker and payee roles and the requirements for a valid negotiable instrument under Alabama law. A further incorrect approach is to conclude that the instrument is a check because it involves a promise to pay. A check, as defined by Alabama UCC Section 75-3-104, F, is a draft drawn on a bank and payable on demand. This instrument, as described, is a direct promise from an individual to another individual, not a draft drawn on a bank. Classifying it as a check would misapply the relevant legal definitions and requirements for negotiability. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by meticulously examining the language of the instrument itself. They must refer to the specific definitions and requirements outlined in the applicable state's UCC. In this case, Alabama's UCC Article 3. The key is to identify who is making the promise to pay, the maker, and who is designated to receive the payment, the payee, based on the instrument's clear terms, rather than making assumptions based on the actions of the parties or incomplete understanding of the legal definitions. Question 4. The analysis reveals that a business owner in Montgomery, Alabama, has received a document from a client that states, "I promise to pay you $5,000 on December 31, 2024, provided that the goods delivered by you are of satisfactory quality." The business owner is unsure if this document constitutes a negotiable instrument under Alabama law. Which of the following best describes the legal status of this document? Option A. The document is a negotiable instrument because it was intended by the parties to be a payment instrument. Option B. The document is a negotiable instrument because it contains a promise to pay a fixed amount of money by a specific date. Option C. The document is not a negotiable instrument because the promise to pay is conditional upon the satisfactory quality of goods. Option D. The document is a negotiable instrument because it is a written promise to pay a sum of money, regardless of any conditions. The correct answer is C. The document is not a negotiable instrument because the promise to pay is conditional upon the satisfactory quality of goods. Question 5. The investigation demonstrates that a promissory note, purportedly executed in Mobile, Alabama, lists Southern Investments LLC as the maker and Alina Vance as the payee. The note contains a clear promise by Southern Investments LLC to pay a specific sum of money to Alina Vance on a future date. However, a separate document, also dated in Mobile, Alabama, shows Robert Sterling signing his name below the signature line of Southern Investments LLC on a copy of the promissory note, with no additional notation indicating his capacity. Based on Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code Article 3, what is the most accurate determination of Robert Sterling's role and potential liability concerning this promissory note? Option A. Robert Sterling is the drawer of the note, ordering Southern Investments LLC to pay a lien advance. Option B. Robert Sterling is likely an accommodation endorser, secondarily liable for the payment of the note if Southern Investments LLC defaults, provided the proper procedures for notice of dishonor are followed. Option C. Robert Sterling is the primary obligor on the note, jointly and severally liable with Southern Investments LLC, as his signature appears on the instrument. Option D. Robert Sterling is merely a witness to the execution of the note and has no legal liability for its payment. The correct answer is B. Robert Sterling is likely an accommodation endorser, secondarily liable for the payment of the note if Southern Investments LLC defaults, provided the proper procedures for notice of dishonor are followed. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a complex situation involving a negotiable instrument where the roles of the parties are not immediately clear, creating a professional challenge. Determining the precise legal standing and obligations of each individual requires a thorough understanding of Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, Article 3, specifically regarding the definitions and liabilities of parties to a negotiable instrument. Misidentification can lead to incorrect legal recourse, potential financial loss, and damage to professional reputation. The best approach involves meticulously examining the instrument itself and the surrounding circumstances to accurately identify each party's role, as defined by Alabama UCC Article 3. This means distinguishing between the maker of a note, the drawer of a draft, the payee, and any endorsers or accommodation parties. For instance, if the instrument is a check, the bank is the drawee, the person writing the check is the drawer, and the person to whom the check is made payable is the payee. If an individual signs the back of the check to guarantee payment, they become an endorser. Understanding these distinctions is crucial for establishing liability and rights. Alabama UCC Section 7-3-104 defines negotiable instruments, and subsequent sections like Section 7-3-301 through Section 7-3-605 outline the rights and liabilities of parties. Properly identifying the maker of a promissory note as the primary obligor and the payee as the initial holder is fundamental. An incorrect approach would be to assume the role of a party based solely on their physical position on the instrument, without considering the legal definitions. For example, assuming the person who physically handed over the instrument is automatically the payee or liable party is a failure to adhere to the UCC's definitions. Another incorrect approach is to conflate the roles of drawer and maker. A drawer orders payment from a drawee, typically a bank, while a maker directly promises to pay. Failing to make this distinction can lead to misdirected legal action. Furthermore, ignoring the possibility of an accommodation party who signs to lend credit to another party but is not a direct beneficiary of the value would be a significant oversight, as their liability is governed by specific provisions under Alabama UCC Section 7-3-419. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process. First, they must identify the type of negotiable instrument presented, e.g., note, draft, check. Second, they should carefully read the instrument to identify all named parties and their stated capacities. Third, they must apply the definitions and rules of Alabama UCC Article 3 to determine the precise legal role and obligations of each identified party. This involves looking for explicit statements of promise or order to pay, the designation of a payee, and any endorsements or guarantees. Finally, they should consider any extrinsic evidence that might clarify ambiguous roles, always within the framework of the UCC. Question 6. Sarah writes a check from her account at First National Bank payable to David for the purchase of a used car. Under Alabama law, what is the fundamental relationship between Sarah, First National Bank, and David concerning this check? Option A. David is the drawer ordering First National Bank to pay Sarah. Option B. First National Bank is the drawer ordering Sarah to pay David. Option C. Sarah is the drawer who orders First National Bank, the drawee, to pay David, the payee, the specified sum. Option D. Sarah is the payee and First National Bank is the drawer ordering David to pay Sarah. The correct answer is C. Sarah is the drawer who orders First National Bank, the drawee, to pay David, the payee, the specified sum. Explanation. Analysis of this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a precise understanding of the roles of the drawer, drawee, and payee in the context of a negotiable instrument, specifically a check, under Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, Article 3. Misinterpreting these roles can lead to incorrect assumptions about liability and the validity of the instrument. The core of the challenge lies in identifying who is obligated to pay and who is entitled to payment. The correct approach involves recognizing that the drawer is the party who writes and signs the check, ordering the drawee, typically a bank, to pay a specified amount to the payee. In this scenario, Sarah is the drawer, and the check is drawn on First National Bank. The payee is the party to whom the check is made payable, which is clearly stated as David. Therefore, David is the party entitled to payment from First National Bank, as ordered by Sarah. This aligns with Alabama UCC Section 3-104F, which defines a draft as an order to pay a sum certain in money, and a check as a draft drawn on a bank and payable on demand. Alabama UCC Section 3-403A establishes that the drawer is obligated to pay the instrument if it is dishonored by the drawee. An incorrect approach would be to assume that the drawee bank is directly liable to the drawer for payment upon presentation, without considering the payee's entitlement. Drawee bank's primary obligation is to the payee, provided the check is properly endorsed and presented, and sufficient funds are available. Another incorrect approach would be to believe that the drawer is solely responsible for ensuring the payee receives the funds, bypassing the drawee's role in the payment process. The drawer's responsibility is to issue a valid order for payment. The drawee executes that order. Finally, assuming the payee has no recourse if the drawee fails to pay, without understanding the drawer's secondary liability under Alabama UCC Section 3-414, would also be an incorrect and professionally unsound conclusion. Professional reasoning in such situations requires a systematic approach. First, identify the type of negotiable instrument. Second, clearly delineate the parties involved: drawer, drawee, payee. Third, determine the primary obligation of each party based on their role in the instrument's terms. And fourth, consult the relevant provisions of Alabama's UCC Article 3 to confirm legal rights and responsibilities. Question 7. Consider a scenario where a commercial bank in Mobile, Alabama, purchases a promissory note from a payee. The bank paid less than the face value of the note, but more than nominal consideration, and acquired it on a weekday during regular business hours. The bank's loan officer had a brief conversation with the payee about the note's origin, during which the payee vaguely mentioned a dispute with the maker regarding the underlying goods for which the note was given. The bank proceeded with the purchase without further investigation into the nature of the dispute. Under Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code Article 3, what is the bank's most likely legal status concerning this promissory note? Option A. The bank is a holder in due course because it took the note for value, in good faith, and without notice of any claim or defense. Option B. The bank is a holder in due course because it is a commercial entity that purchased the note during business hours. Option C. The bank is not a holder in due course because the loan officer's conversation provided sufficient notice of a potential defense. Option D. The bank is not a holder in due course because it failed to take the note for full face value. The correct answer is A. The bank is a holder in due course because it took the note for value, in good faith, and without notice of any claim or defense. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires distinguishing between a mere holder of a negotiable instrument and a holder in due course, HDC. The distinction is critical as it significantly impacts the rights and defenses available against the instrument's enforcement. A bank, acting as a financial institution, must exercise due diligence to understand the legal standing of instruments it acquires to avoid potential legal disputes and financial losses. The core of the challenge lies in applying the specific requirements of Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code, Article 3, to the facts presented. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves meticulously evaluating whether the bank meets all the statutory criteria to be considered a holder in due course under Alabama UCC Article 3. This requires confirming that the bank took the note for value, in good faith, and without notice of any claim or defense against it. Specifically, the bank must demonstrate that it acquired the note under circumstances that would lead a reasonable person to believe the note was valid, and that it had no knowledge, actual or constructive, of any defects in the title or defenses to payment that the original maker might have. This adherence to the statutory definition is paramount for establishing the enhanced rights of an HDC, such as taking the instrument free from most defenses. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to assume that simply possessing the note and having paid some consideration for it automatically confers holder in due course status. This fails to account for the good faith requirement and the crucial element of notice. If the bank had reason to know of the maker's defenses, e.g., the note was procured by fraud, or there was a breach of contract related to the underlying transaction, but proceeded with the acquisition, it would not qualify as an HDC. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the fact that the bank is a commercial entity, implying a presumption of HDC status. Alabama law does not grant such a blanket presumption. The bank must affirmatively prove it meets the statutory tests. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed of transaction over thorough due diligence, leading to the acquisition of a note without adequate inquiry into its legitimacy or potential defenses, would also be professionally unsound and legally deficient. Professional reasoning. Professionals in financial institutions must adopt a systematic approach when evaluating negotiable instruments. This involves 1. Identifying the instrument and the parties involved. 2. Ascertaining whether the instrument meets the basic requirements of negotiability under Alabama UCC Article 3. 3. Critically assessing whether the acquiring party, in this case, the bank, satisfies each element of the holder in due course definition, taking for value in good faith and without notice of any claim or defense. This requires a thorough review of the transaction's circumstances and any available information that might indicate a defense. 4. Documenting the due diligence performed to support the claim of holder in due course status if it becomes necessary. Question 8. During the evaluation of a promissory note governed by Alabama law, a financial institution receives the note through a series of endorsements. The institution acquired the note from a reputable dealer, paying a price that was slightly below face value, and processed the transaction within a standard business day. The institution's internal review did not uncover any obvious signs of alteration or forgery, and the note appeared to be in order on its face. However, a week prior to this acquisition, the institution had received a general industry alert regarding potential financial distress among companies in the same sector as the original payee, though this alert did not specifically name the original payee or mention any issues with their instruments. Considering these circumstances, what is the most accurate determination of the financial institution's status concerning the promissory note under Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code Article 3? Option A. The financial institution is automatically a holder in due course because it acquired the note from a reputable dealer and the note was properly endorsed. Option B. The financial institution is likely a holder in due course because it acquired the note by endorsement, paid value, and had no specific knowledge of any defenses or claims against this particular note at the time of acquisition, despite the general industry alert. Option C. The financial institution is not a holder in due course because the general industry alert constitutes constructive notice of potential defenses, even without specific information about the note. Option D. The financial institution cannot be a holder in due course because the price paid was below face value, which suggests a lack of good faith. The correct answer is B. The financial institution is likely a holder in due course because it acquired the note by endorsement, paid value, and had no specific knowledge of any defenses or claims against this particular note at the time of acquisition, despite the general industry alert. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires distinguishing between a holder who has merely taken possession of a negotiable instrument and one who qualifies for the enhanced protections afforded to a holder in due course, HDC, under Alabama law. The distinction is critical as it impacts the defenses available against payment. A holder in due course takes the instrument free from most personal defenses that the maker might raise, whereas a mere holder is subject to all defenses. Therefore, a careful assessment of the circumstances surrounding the acquisition of the instrument is paramount to determine the legal rights and obligations of the parties involved. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves meticulously examining the facts to determine if the holder meets the statutory criteria for being a holder in due course under Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, Article 3. This requires verifying that the holder took the instrument 1. for value, 2. in good faith, and 3. without notice that it was overdue or dishonored or that it contained any unauthorized signature or alteration or any other claim to it or defense against it. Specifically, the holder must demonstrate they had no knowledge of any defect or claim at the time of acquisition. This aligns with Alabama UCC Section 7-3-302, which defines a holder in due course. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that simply possessing the instrument, even if acquired from a party with apparent authority, automatically confers holder in due course status. This fails to acknowledge the statutory requirements of taking for value in good faith and without notice. If the holder knew or had reason to know of a defense or claim at the time of acquisition, they cannot be an HDC, regardless of how they obtained the instrument. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the absence of a forged signature or material alteration. While these are defenses that an HDC is generally protected against, they do not, in themselves, establish that the holder is an HDC. Holder must still satisfy the affirmative requirements of value, good faith, and lack of notice of other defenses or claims. A further incorrect approach is to conclude that because the instrument was transferred by endorsement, the holder is automatically an HDC. While endorsement is a necessary step for a holder to become an HDC of an order instrument, it is not sufficient on its own. The endorsement must be accompanied by the other elements of value: good faith and lack of notice. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach when evaluating negotiable instruments. First, confirm that the instrument is negotiable. Second, determine if the party in possession is a holder, possessing the instrument and having the necessary endorsements. Third, critically assess whether the holder meets the specific statutory criteria for being a holder in due course under Alabama UCC Article 3, paying close attention to the elements of value, good faith, and notice. This structured analysis ensures compliance with legal requirements and protects against erroneous assumptions about legal rights. Question 9. Research into the Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, Article 3 as adopted in Alabama reveals a check with the following endorsements on the back. First, a blank endorsement. Second, a special endorsement to Sarah Miller. And third, a restrictive endorsement by Sarah Miller stating, for deposit only to account #12,345. If the face amount of the check is $5,000, and the bank receives this check for deposit, what is the maximum amount the bank can legally credit to account #12,345 based on these endorsements? Option A, $0 as the qualified endorsement without recourse invalidates the restrictive endorsement. Option B, $5,000 as the special endorsement to Sarah Miller makes it fully negotiable by her. Option C, $5,000 regardless of the account it is deposited into due to the initial blank endorsement. Option D, $5,000 provided the deposit is made into account #12,345. Correct answer is D, $5,000 provided the deposit is made into account #12,345. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential for financial loss and the need to accurately apply the Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, Article 3 provisions governing negotiable instruments in Alabama. The core difficulty lies in correctly identifying the legal effect of different endorsement types on the negotiability and transferability of a check, particularly when multiple endorsements are present, and one is restrictive. Misinterpreting these endorsements can lead to improper negotiation, unauthorized payment, and potential liability for the financial institution. The best professional approach involves meticulously examining each endorsement in chronological order and applying the UCC Article 3 rules for Alabama. Specifically, a blank endorsement converts the instrument into bearer paper, while a special endorsement specifies a new payee. A restrictive endorsement, such as for deposit only, limits the negotiation of the instrument to the purpose stated. A qualified endorsement, like without recourse, disclaims the endorser's liability on the instrument. In this case, the initial blank endorsement makes the check payable to bearer. The subsequent special endorsement to Sarah Miller makes it payable to Sarah Miller. The final restrictive endorsement by Sarah Miller, for deposit only to account #12,345, limits further negotiation to deposit into that specific account. Therefore, the check can only be properly negotiated by depositing it into account #12,345. This approach correctly interprets the cumulative effect of the endorsements under Alabama UCC Section 3-205 and Section 3-206, ensuring compliance and preventing unauthorized transactions. An incorrect approach would be to disregard the restrictive endorsement by Sarah Miller and treat the check as still freely negotiable after her special endorsement. This fails to recognize that a restrictive endorsement, once made, controls the subsequent negotiation of the instrument, even if it was previously payable to bearer or specially endorsed. Under Alabama UCC Section 3-206, a depository bank that takes an instrument for collection is subject to the restriction. Paying the check to someone other than the designated account holder or for a purpose other than deposit into account #12345 would violate this provision and expose the bank to liability. Another incorrect approach would be to assume the qualified endorsement without recourse by Sarah Miller negates the restrictive endorsement. A qualified endorsement affects the endorser's liability, not the negotiability or restrictions placed on the instrument by a subsequent restrictive endorsement. The UCC does not permit a qualified endorsement to override a restrictive endorsement's limitations on negotiation. A further incorrect approach would be to consider only the first endorsement and ignore subsequent endorsements. Negotiable instruments can be endorsed multiple times, and each endorsement modifies the legal status of the instrument. The UCC requires consideration of all valid endorsements in sequence to determine the current holder and the proper method of negotiation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of all endorsements on a negotiable instrument. This includes identifying the type of each endorsement, blank, special, restrictive, qualified, and understanding its legal implications under UCC Article 3 as adopted by Alabama. When a restrictive endorsement is present, its terms must be strictly adhered to. If there are multiple endorsements, their cumulative effect must be analyzed. In cases of doubt, consulting legal counsel or seeking clarification from the parties involved is advisable to ensure compliance and mitigate risk. Question 10. Cost-benefit analysis shows that processing a negotiable instrument quickly can reduce operational costs for a bank. However, in Alabama, a customer presents a check payable to John Smith with a handwritten endorsement that appears to be J. Smith and claims to be the rightful owner. What is the most prudent course of action for the bank to take to ensure compliance with Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code Article 3 regarding the transfer of negotiable instruments? Option A. Refuse to cash or deposit the check until the endorsement is clarified to precisely match the payee's name or a proper endorsement is provided, and confirm the circumstances of the transfer. Option B. Contact the purported payee, John Smith, directly to verify the endorsement and transfer without involving the customer presenting the check. Option C. Cash the check immediately, assuming the handwritten endorsement is sufficient given the customer's possession of the instrument. Option D. Deposit the check into the customer's account and await notification from the payee or any other claimant, relying on the bank's deposit agreement to cover potential issues. The correct answer is A. Refuse to cash or deposit the check until the endorsement is clarified to precisely match the payee's name or a proper endorsement is provided, and confirm the circumstances of the transfer. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a potentially valuable negotiable instrument and a dispute over its rightful ownership and transfer. Navigating the transfer requirements under Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, Article 3, is critical to ensuring the legal validity of the transfer and avoiding potential liability for wrongful payment or conversion. The core issue is determining whether the endorsement and delivery meet the statutory requirements for a holder in due course or a mere holder, impacting the rights of the parties involved. The best professional approach involves a thorough examination of the instrument itself and the circumstances surrounding its transfer, adhering strictly to the Alabama UCC. This means verifying that the instrument is properly payable to the intended recipient and that the endorsement, if present, is valid and authorized. Furthermore, it requires confirming that delivery was made with the intent to transfer ownership. In this case, the bank should have sought clarification from the purported transferee regarding the nature of the endorsement and the circumstances of the transfer. If the endorsement is incomplete or unauthorized, or if delivery was not intended to effect a transfer, the bank should refuse to honor the instrument until these issues are resolved. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and risk mitigation, protecting both the bank and the rightful owner of the instrument. An incorrect approach would be to assume the validity of the transfer based solely on the physical possession of the instrument. This fails to account for the legal requirements of endorsement and delivery as defined by Alabama's UCC Article 3. For instance, if the endorsement is missing or forged, possession alone does not confer the rights of a holder. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with payment without investigating the legitimacy of the endorsement or the circumstances of the transfer, especially when presented with a potentially irregular endorsement. This exposes the bank to significant legal risk, including liability for paying on a forged or unauthorized endorsement, or for conversion if the instrument was not properly transferred. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with identifying the type of instrument and the relevant governing law, Alabama, UCC Article 3. They must then meticulously assess the instrument for any defects in its form or endorsements. Crucially, they should investigate the circumstances of the transfer, paying close attention to the intent of the parties and the method of delivery. When in doubt, seeking legal counsel or requesting further documentation from the parties involved is a prudent step to ensure compliance and avoid potential disputes. Question 11. Cost-benefit analysis shows that depositing a check endorsed for deposit only into a separate account designated for the endorser's business expenses would be the most efficient way to manage funds, but the endorsee could also benefit from depositing it into their personal account to cover immediate personal expenses. Considering the Alabama Uniform Commercial Code, which approach best protects the endorsee from potential liability while respecting the endorser's intent? Option A. Negotiate the check to a third party for the endorsee's personal benefit. Option B. Cash the check and use the funds to pay the endorser's personal bills directly. Option C. Deposit the check into the endorsee's personal checking account. Option D. Deposit the check into a separate account designated for the endorser's business expenses. The correct answer is D. Deposit the check into a separate account designated for the endorser's business expenses. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in commercial transactions involving negotiable instruments. The professional difficulty lies in accurately determining the rights and liabilities of parties involved when an instrument is transferred with a restrictive endorsement, especially when the endorsee's actions might appear to benefit the endorser, but could also expose them to liability. Careful judgment is required to navigate the UCC's provisions on endorsement and the holder's rights to ensure compliance and avoid potential disputes. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves recognizing that a restrictive endorsement, such as for deposit only, significantly limits the endorsee's ability to negotiate the instrument further or use the funds for purposes other than those specified. Endorsee, in this case, has a duty to adhere strictly to the terms of the endorsement. Therefore, depositing the check into a separate account designated for the endorser's business expenses, as opposed to their personal account, aligns with the intent of the restrictive endorsement and fulfills the endorsee's duty to act in accordance with the endorsement's limitations. This approach respects the contractual nature of the endorsement and prevents commingling of funds or unauthorized use, thereby protecting the endorser's interests and adhering to the principles of UCC Article 3 in Alabama. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to deposit the check into the endorsee's personal checking account. This fails to honor the restrictive endorsement for deposit only and violates the endorsee's duty to act in accordance with the endorsement's terms. The restrictive endorsement implies a specific purpose for the deposit, and commingling the funds with personal assets disregards this limitation, potentially exposing the endorsee to liability for conversion or breach of trust. Another incorrect approach is to cash the check and use the funds to pay the endorser's personal bills directly. This is a clear violation of the restrictive endorsement. The endorsement limits the instrument to a deposit, not a cash withdrawal for discretionary spending. Such an action would constitute a conversion of the instrument and a breach of the endorsee's duties, making them liable to the endorser for the full amount of the check. A further incorrect approach is to negotiate the check to a third party for the endorsee's personal benefit. This directly contravenes the restrictive endorsement, which restricts the instrument's use to a deposit for the endorser. Negotiating it to someone else for personal gain would be a fraudulent act and a serious breach of the endorsee's obligations, leading to significant legal repercussions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach situations involving restrictive endorsements by prioritizing a strict interpretation of the endorsement's language. The Uniform Commercial Code, as adopted in Alabama, emphasizes the importance of adhering to the terms of endorsements to maintain the integrity of negotiable instruments. When faced with ambiguity or a perceived benefit to oneself, the professional decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the specific type of endorsement and its legal implications under UCC Article 3. 2. Assessing the proposed action against the explicit terms of the endorsement. 3. Considering the potential impact on the rights and liabilities of all parties involved. And 4. Seeking legal counsel if there is any doubt about the proper course of action. The guiding principle is to act in a manner that respects the limitations imposed by the endorsement and upholds the legal framework governing negotiable instruments. Question 12. Market research demonstrates that a significant number of small businesses in Alabama are experiencing issues with the enforceability of promissory notes due to allegations of fraudulent inducement during their creation. A client, a small business owner in Birmingham, Alabama, presents a promissory note that was issued to a vendor. The client now claims the vendor engaged in significant fraud in the inducement to get the note signed, leading to the current dispute over payment. The client wants to know if the note is automatically void and unenforceable against anyone, including the vendor's current assignee, who claims to be a holder in due course. Option A. The note is automatically void and unenforceable against any party, including the assignee, because the initial transaction was tainted by fraud. Option B. The note is unenforceable against the client because the fraud occurred before the note was issued, rendering the entire instrument invalid from its inception. Option C. The note is unenforceable against the assignee because the client can assert the fraud as a defense, regardless of whether the assignee is a holder in due course. Option D. The note is likely enforceable by the assignee if they qualify as a holder in due course, as fraud in the inducement is generally a personal defense that cannot be asserted against a holder in due course under Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code Article 3. The correct answer is D. The note is likely enforceable by the assignee if they qualify as a holder in due course, as fraud in the inducement is generally a personal defense that cannot be asserted against a holder in due course under Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code Article 3. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of how fraudulent inducement can impact the enforceability of a negotiable instrument under Alabama law, specifically the Uniform Commercial Code, UC, Article 3. The holder in due course doctrine is central to this, as it can shield a holder from certain defenses, but not all. A financial advisor must navigate the tension between the rights of a holder in due course and the fundamental principles of contract law that render agreements void or voidable due to fraud. Careful judgment is required to determine if the fraud alleged is a real defense that can be asserted against the holder, even if they appear to meet the criteria of a holder in due course. The best professional approach involves recognizing that fraud in the inducement, while potentially making a contract voidable, does not automatically render the instrument a nullity. Instead, it creates a defense that can be asserted against a party who is not a holder in due course. However, if the holder qualifies as a holder in due course, they take the instrument free from all defenses of any party to the instrument with whom the holder has not dealt, except for real defenses. Fraud in the inducement is generally considered a personal defense, not a real defense, meaning it cannot be asserted against a holder in due course. Therefore, the advisor should proceed with the assumption that the instrument is enforceable by a holder in due course, unless evidence clearly demonstrates a real defense or a defect in the holder's status. The advisor's duty is to advise the client on the legal standing of the instrument based on the UCC as adopted in Alabama, which prioritizes the negotiability and enforceability of instruments when held by a holder in due course, subject to specific exception. An incorrect approach would be to immediately declare the instrument unenforceable solely because of the alleged fraud. This fails to consider the UCC's provisions regarding holders in due course, which are designed to promote the free circulation of negotiable instruments. By ignoring the potential holder in due course status of the recipient, this approach overlooks a critical aspect of Alabama commercial paper law. Another incorrect approach is to advise the client that the instrument is automatically void due to the fraud, regardless of who possesses it. This misinterprets the nature of fraud in the inducement. While fraud can make a contract voidable, it does not automatically render the instrument void ab initio. The distinction is crucial, as a voidable instrument can still be enforced by a holder in due course. Finally, advising the client that the instrument is unenforceable because the fraud occurred before its issuance, without further analysis of the holder's status, is also flawed. The timing of the fraud is relevant, but the enforceability hinges on whether the current holder is a holder in due course and whether the defense is personal or real. This approach prematurely concludes enforceability without a complete legal assessment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Identifying the type of instrument and relevant governing law, UCC Article 3 in Alabama. 2. Determining the status of the party seeking to enforce the instrument, e.g., holder in due course. 3. Assessing the nature of any defenses raised, real vs. personal. 4. Applying the specific provisions of UCC Article 3 to the facts, particularly concerning the rights of a holder in due course against various defenses. Question 13. The monitoring system demonstrates a document presented for processing that contains a written promise to pay a specific sum of money, signed by the promisor. However, the document also includes a clause stating, this payment is contingent upon the satisfactory completion of services rendered by the payee. Considering the provisions of Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, Article 3, which of the following best describes the legal status of this document? Option A. The document is a negotiable instrument, and the contingency clause should be interpreted as a separate agreement that does not impact the instrument's payment terms. Option B. The document is not a negotiable instrument because the promise to pay is conditional upon the satisfactory completion of services. Option C. The document is a negotiable instrument, and the contingency clause is merely a standard contractual term that does not affect its negotiability. Option D. The document is a negotiable instrument, but its negotiability is suspended until the satisfactory completion of services is confirmed. The correct answer is B. The document is not a negotiable instrument because the promise to pay is conditional upon the satisfactory completion of services. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a potential issue with a negotiable instrument, presenting a professionally challenging scenario that requires careful judgment to ensure compliance with Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, Article 3. The challenge lies in accurately identifying whether a document qualifies as a negotiable instrument and understanding the implications of any defects. The best approach involves a thorough examination of the document against the statutory requirements for negotiability under Alabama UCC Section 75-3-104. This includes verifying that the instrument is a signed writing, contains an unconditional promise or order to pay a fixed amount of money, is payable on demand or at a definite time, and is payable to order or to bearer. If these elements are present, the instrument is likely negotiable, and subsequent rights and liabilities will be governed by UCC Article 3. This approach is correct because it directly applies the established legal framework to the facts, ensuring that legal rights and obligations are correctly determined according to Alabama law. An incorrect approach would be to assume negotiability based solely on the presence of a monetary amount and a signature. This fails to account for the unconditional nature of the promise or order, or the requirement for payment to order or bearer, which are critical for an instrument to be considered negotiable under Alabama UCC Section 75-3-104. Without these elements, the document may be a simple contract or assignment, not subject to the specific rules of Article 3, leading to potential misapplication of legal principles. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the document as non-negotiable simply because it contains additional terms or clauses, without first assessing whether those terms materially alter the unconditional nature of the promise or order as required by Alabama UCC Section 75-3-104. 1. While certain clauses can destroy negotiability, others may be permissible. A hasty dismissal without this nuanced analysis can lead to overlooking a valid negotiable instrument. Finally, an incorrect approach is to treat the document as negotiable without confirming it is payable to order or to bearer. Alabama UCC Section 75-3-104. 1. Explicitly requires this for an instrument to be negotiable. Failure to verify this characteristic means the instrument might not be transferable by endorsement and delivery in the manner contemplated by Article 3, potentially leading to disputes over rightful ownership and negotiation. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process. First, identify the document in question. Second, Meticulously compare its features against each statutory requirement for negotiability outlined in Alabama UCC Section 75-3-104. Third, if all requirements are met, proceed with the analysis under UCC Article 3. And fourth, if any requirement is not met, determine the document's legal status under general contract law or other applicable statutes. This structured approach ensures accuracy and adherence to the governing legal framework. Question 14. Which approach would be most effective for a financial advisor in Alabama to determine if a client's document constitutes a negotiable instrument under Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code Article 3? Option A. A meticulous review of the document to confirm it is a signed writing, contains an unconditional promise or order to pay a fixed amount of money, is payable on demand or at a definite time, and is payable to order or to bearer. Option B. Relying on the general appearance of the document and common industry practices to infer its negotiability. Option C. A quick assessment based on whether the document clearly states a monetary amount and includes a signature, without further scrutiny of other legal requirements. Option D. Prioritizing the speed of classification to provide a prompt response to the client, even if a complete legal analysis of all criteria is not performed. The correct answer is A. A meticulous review of the document to confirm it is a signed writing, contains an unconditional promise or order to pay a fixed amount of money, is payable on demand or at a definite time, and is payable to order or to bearer. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a financial advisor to distinguish between a negotiable instrument and a non-negotiable document, which has significant legal and practical implications under Alabama law. Misclassifying an instrument can lead to incorrect advice regarding transferability, enforceability, and the rights of holders, potentially exposing the advisor and their client to financial loss and legal liability. Careful judgment is required to apply the principles of Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, Article 3. The approach that represents best professional practice involves a thorough examination of the document against the specific requirements for negotiability outlined in Alabama UCC Article 3. This includes verifying that the instrument is a signed writing, contains an unconditional promise or order to pay a fixed amount of money, is payable on demand or at a definite time, and is payable to order or to bearer. By meticulously checking these elements, the advisor can accurately determine if the document qualifies as a negotiable instrument, thereby providing sound and legally compliant advice. This aligns with the ethical duty to provide competent and diligent representation, grounded in the specific laws of Alabama, an approach that focuses solely on the presence of a monetary amount and a signature, without verifying the unconditional nature of the promise or the specific payment terms, on demand or at a definite time, fails to meet the statutory requirements for negotiability under Alabama UCC Article 3. This oversight could lead to advising a client that a non-negotiable document can be transferred with the same legal protections as a negotiable instrument, which is incorrect and could result in disputes over payment or ownership. Another unacceptable approach is to assume negotiability based on the document's appearance or common usage, without a detailed review of its terms against the UCC. This reliance on assumptions rather than legal analysis is a breach of professional duty and can lead to advising clients on the basis of flawed legal understanding. The law in Alabama is clear on the specific criteria for negotiability, and deviating from these criteria based on assumptions is professionally negligent. Furthermore, an approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy by quickly classifying the document without a comprehensive review of all statutory requirements for negotiability under Alabama UCC Article 3 is also professionally unsound. The legal definition of a negotiable instrument is precise, and any deviation from a thorough, element-by-element analysis risks misinterpretation and incorrect advice, potentially harming the client's financial interests and the advisor's professional standing. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of the document against the codified requirements of Alabama UCC Article 3. This includes understanding the purpose of negotiability, the rights it confers, and the consequences of an instrument failing to meet these criteria. When in doubt, seeking clarification from legal counsel specializing in commercial law in Alabama is a prudent step to ensure accurate and compliant advice. Question 15. Investigation of a commercial transaction in Alabama reveals that a check payable to Acme Supplies, Inc. was handed by an Acme employee to a courier service for delivery to Beta Corp. The Acme employee, however, forgot to have the designated Acme representative sign the back of the check before giving it to the courier. What is the status of the transfer of the check from Acme Supplies, Inc. to Beta Corp? Option A. The transfer is complete because the physical delivery to the courier service constitutes delivery to Beta Corp. Option B. The transfer is complete because the check is a negotiable instrument and possession by the courier is sufficient for transfer. Option C. The transfer is incomplete because the check was not properly endorsed by the payee Acme Supplies, Inc. before delivery to the courier. Option D. The transfer is complete because the courier service is acting as an agent for Beta Corp. The correct answer is C. The transfer is incomplete because the check was not properly endorsed by the payee Acme Supplies, Inc. before delivery to the courier. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the transfer of a negotiable instrument, specifically a check, in Alabama. The core issue is ensuring the transfer is legally valid and effective under Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, Article 3, which governs negotiable instruments. Misunderstanding the requirements for endorsement and delivery can lead to disputes over ownership, potential fraud, and legal complications for all parties involved. Careful judgment is required to navigate the specific legal requirements for transferring such an instrument. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves ensuring the check is properly endorsed by the named payee and then physically delivered to the intended transferee. This approach aligns directly with the fundamental requirements for transferring a negotiable instrument under Alabama UCC Section 3-201. Proper endorsement signifies the payee's intent to transfer their rights in the instrument, and delivery completes the transfer of possession and control. This dual requirement is essential for a valid negotiation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves merely handing the check to another person without any endorsement from the named payee. This fails to meet the legal requirement for endorsement, which is a critical step in negotiating an order instrument. Without the payee's signature, the transferee does not acquire the rights of a holder, and the transfer is incomplete, leaving the original payee with potential claims to the instrument. Another incorrect approach is to have the payee endorse the check, but then retain possession of it, intending to transfer it later. This fails to satisfy the delivery requirement. Under Alabama UCC Section 3-201, a transfer occurs only upon delivery. Retaining possession means the transfer of rights has not been completed, and the instrument remains under the control of the endorser. A third incorrect approach is to endorse the check in blank, signing only, and then mail it to a third party with instructions for them to hold it indefinitely without further action. While a blank endorsement can make the instrument payable to bearer, the subsequent failure to complete the transfer through delivery to the intended recipient or further endorsement renders the transfer incomplete. The instrument is not effectively transferred until it is delivered to someone who takes possession with the intent to acquire rights. Professional reasoning. Professionals dealing with negotiable instruments in Alabama should always prioritize understanding and adhering to the specific requirements of UCC Article 3 regarding endorsement and delivery. When presented with a check for transfer, the first step is to verify that the named payee has properly endorsed it. The second critical step is to ensure the physical delivery of the endorsed instrument to the intended recipient. If there is any ambiguity, or if the situation deviates from these core requirements, seeking legal counsel or consulting relevant UCC provisions is advisable to prevent legal challenges and ensure the integrity of the transaction. Question 16. In Alabama, a document states, I, Robert Smith, promise to pay to the order of Emily Jones the sum of $2,000, $2,000, upon the successful completion of the renovation project at my residence. Considering the requirements of Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code Article 3, what is the legal classification of this document? Option A. The document is a negotiable instrument because it is in writing and signed by the maker. Option B. The document is not a negotiable instrument because it is payable to a specific person and not to bearer. Option C. The document is a negotiable instrument because it contains a promise to pay a fixed amount of money at a definite time. Option D. The document is not a negotiable instrument because the promise to pay is conditional upon the successful completion of the renovation project. correct answer is D. The document is not a negotiable instrument because the promise to pay is conditional upon the successful completion of the renovation project. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of the Alabama Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, Article 3 definition of a negotiable instrument, specifically focusing on the requirement of an unconditional promise or order. Misinterpreting this requirement can lead to incorrect legal classifications, impacting enforceability and rights of parties involved. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between instruments that meet the UCC's strict criteria and those that do not. The best professional approach involves meticulously examining the language of the document to determine if the promise or order to pay is truly unconditional. This means assessing whether any conditions precedent or subsequent are attached that would negate negotiability. Under Alabama UCC Section 75-3-104, a negotiable instrument must contain an unconditional promise or order to pay a fixed amount of money, payable on demand or at a definite time, to order or to bearer. The key here is unconditional. If the document states pay to the order of John Doe, provided that he completes the landscaping project by June 1st, this introduces a condition. The correct approach is to identify that such a condition renders the promise conditional, thus disqualifying the instrument from being negotiable under Alabama law. An incorrect approach would be to assume that any written promise to pay constitutes a negotiable instrument. For instance, if a document states, "I promise to pay Sarah Smith $500 upon receipt of the invoice," this is a conditional promise. The payment is contingent upon the receipt of the invoice, which is an event that may or may not occur. This failure to recognize the condition precedent violates the unconditional requirement of Alabama UCC Section 75-3-104. Another incorrect approach is to overlook the to order or to bearer requirement. If the document simply states, "Pay to John Doe $1,000,000," without specifying or his order, or making it payable to bearer, it may not be negotiable. This overlooks a fundamental characteristic of negotiable instruments as defined by Alabama UCC Section 75-3-104. Finally, focusing solely on the fixed amount and time of payment while ignoring the nature of the promise or order is also an incorrect approach. For example, a document might promise a fixed amount at a definite time but still be conditional, such as pay $1,000 on July 1st if the stock market closes above 30,000. This conditionality, even with a fixed amount and time, prevents negotiability under Alabama UCC Section 75-3-104. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making framework when evaluating potential negotiable instruments. This involves a checklist approach, verifying each element required by Alabama UCC Section 75-3-104. 1. Is it in writing? 2. Does it contain an unconditional promise or order to pay? 3. Is it for a fixed amount of money? 4. Is it payable on demand or at a definite time? 5. Is it payable to order or to bearer? 6. Does it name a payee? 7. Does it contain any other promises, orders, obligations, or powers which are not authorized by Article 3? Strict adherence to these criteria, with particular scrutiny on the unconditional nature of the promise or order, is crucial for accurate classification and subsequent legal analysis. Question 17. Benchmark analysis indicates that financial institutions in Alabama frequently encounter various commercial instruments. A recent internal review of a batch of documents has raised questions about the negotiability of a particular instrument. The instrument is a written document, signed by the purported maker, which states, "I promise to pay to the order of John Doe the sum of $5,000, $5,000,000, upon the successful completion of the construction project at 123 Main Street, Birmingham, Alabama. Based on Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code Article 3, which of the following assessments is most accurate regarding the negotiability of this instrument?" Option A. The instrument is negotiable because it is a written promise to pay a sum of money, and the completion of a construction project is a common business event. Option B. The instrument is negotiable because it is in writing, signed, for a fixed amount and payable to a specific person. Option C. The instrument is not negotiable because it is payable to a specific person, John Doe, and does not include the words or order or bearer. Option D. The instrument is not negotiable because the promise to pay is conditional upon the successful completion of the construction project. correct answer is D. The instrument is not negotiable because the promise to pay is conditional upon the successful completion of the construction project. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a nuanced understanding of the Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, Article 3, as adopted in Alabama, specifically concerning the elements of negotiability. Misinterpreting these elements can lead to incorrect legal conclusions about whether an instrument is a negotiable instrument, impacting its transferability and the rights of holders. Careful judgment is required to apply the statutory definitions to the specific facts presented. The correct approach involves a thorough examination of the instrument against each statutory requirement for negotiability under Alabama's UCC Article 3. This means verifying if the instrument is in writing, signed by the maker or drawer, contains an unconditional promise or order to pay a fixed amount of money, and is payable on demand or at a definite time, and payable to order or to bearer. For an instrument to be negotiable, it must satisfy all these criteria. For example, if the promise to pay is subject to a condition, it fails the unconditional requirement. Similarly, if the amount is variable or uncertain, it fails the fixed amount requirement. An incorrect approach would be to overlook any single element of negotiability. For instance, if an instrument is payable to a specific named person without the words or order or bearer, it is not payable to order or bearer and therefore not negotiable. Another failure would be to consider an instrument negotiable if it contains terms that make the payment contingent or subject to external events, thereby violating the unconditional promise or order requirement. Furthermore, if the instrument specifies payment in a medium other than money, or if the amount is not clearly ascertainable, it would not meet the fixed amount requirement. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process when evaluating negotiable instruments. This process begins with identifying the relevant jurisdiction's commercial code, in this case, Alabama's UCC Article 3. Next, each element of negotiability must be assessed individually against the specific terms of the instrument. If any element is not met, the instrument is non-negotiable. This methodical approach ensures compliance with statutory requirements and prevents erroneous legal classifications. Question 18. The evaluation methodology shows that in Alabama, when drafting a promissory note, a financial advisor is reviewing a document intended to formalize a loan between two individuals. The advisor needs to ensure the note clearly establishes the obligation to repay and identifies the recipient of the funds. Which of the following approaches best ensures the promissory note is legally sound and functions as intended under Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code, Article 3? Option A. The note clearly states the name of the individual promising to repay the loan as the maker and the name of the individual to whom the repayment is due as the payee, with both parties' signatures affixed in their respective capacities. Option B. The note uses vague language such as the lender to identify the payee without specifying a name. Option C. The note leaves the payee's name blank, with instructions to the maker to fill it in later once the exact repayment amount is finalized. Option D. The note lists the individual receiving the loan funds as the maker and the individual providing the funds as the payee, with the signatures reversed. The correct answer is A. The note clearly states the name of the individual promising to repay the loan as the maker and the name of the individual to whom the repayment is due as the payee, with both parties' signatures affixed in their respective capacities. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that understanding the roles of the maker and payee in a promissory note is fundamental to ensuring the enforceability and validity of the instrument under Alabama law, specifically as governed by Article 3 of the Uniform Commercial Code, UCC. This scenario is professionally challenging because misinterpreting or improperly documenting these roles can lead to disputes over payment, potential claims of fraud, and the instrument being deemed non-negotiable, thereby losing its commercial utility. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the note accurately reflects the agreement between the parties and complies with statutory requirements. The correct approach involves clearly identifying the party obligated to pay, the maker, and the party entitled to receive payment, the payee, directly on the face of the promissory note. This clarity is essential for establishing a clear contractual obligation and for the instrument to function as a negotiable instrument under Alabama UCC Section 3-104. When the note explicitly states I, maker's name, promise to pay to the order of payee's name, or similar unambiguous language, It establishes the maker's absolute promise to pay and designates the specific payee entitled to that payment. This direct designation ensures that the instrument is properly payable and that the rights and obligations of each party are clearly defined, preventing ambiguity and facilitating lawful transfer. An incorrect approach would be to leave the payee's name blank or to use vague language that does not clearly identify the intended recipient of the payment. Alabama UCC Section 3-104A. 2. Requires a negotiable instrument to be payable to order or to bearer. If the payee is not clearly identified, the instrument may fail to meet the order requirement, rendering it non-negotiable. This ambiguity can lead to disputes about who is entitled to enforce the note and can make it impossible for a holder in due course to acquire rights. Another incorrect approach would be to confuse the roles. For example, by having the payee sign as the maker, or by having the maker's signature appear in a capacity that suggests they are the recipient of the funds rather than the obligor. This misrepresentation of roles undermines the fundamental nature of a promissory note, which is a promise by one party to pay another. Such errors can invalidate the instrument or create significant legal hurdles in enforcing the debt, potentially exposing the parties to claims of misrepresentation or even fraud. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes clarity, accuracy, and compliance with the UCC. This involves meticulously reviewing the promissory note to ensure that the maker's identity and signature are correctly placed, signifying their promise to pay. Simultaneously, the payee's identity must be unequivocally stated, identifying the specific individual or entity to whom payment is due. Any ambiguity or deviation from these clear roles should be addressed and corrected before the instrument is executed. This proactive approach ensures the note's negotiability and enforceability, safeguarding the interests of all parties involved and upholding the integrity of commercial transactions in Alabama. Question 19. Process analysis reveals that a promissory note governed by Alabama law, dated January 15, 2023, states due on demand. If the holder of this note presents it for payment on February 10, 2023, what is the earliest date on which the principal amount became legally due and payable according to Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code Article 3? Option A. The date the holder decides to demand payment which is not determinable from the provided information. Option B. February 10, 2023. Option C. March 1, 2023. Option D. January 15, 2023. Correct answer is D. January 15, 2023. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in accurately calculating the maturity date of a promissory note, which is crucial for timely payment, interest accrual, and compliance with Alabama's Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, Article 3. Miscalculation can lead to disputes, financial penalties, and damage to professional reputation. Careful judgment is required to apply the correct UCC provisions for determining the date of maturity. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves directly applying the UCC's rules for determining the date of maturity when a note is payable on demand. Under Alabama law, as codified in UCC Section 3-108A, an instrument is payable on demand if it states that it is payable on demand, or at sight, or otherwise indicates that it is payable at the will of the holder, or if no time for payment is stated. When an instrument is payable on demand, it is due immediately upon its date or, if no date is stated, upon issuance. Therefore, a note stating due on demand is immediately due and payable on the date it is issued. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that on demand implies a future, unspecified date that requires a grace period or a reasonable time for presentment before it is considered due. This fails to recognize that UCC Section 3-108A explicitly defines instruments payable on demand as being due immediately upon issuance or dating. This misinterpretation can lead to incorrect calculations of when interest begins to accrue or when a default might occur. Another incorrect approach is to treat on demand as equivalent to a note with a specific future date, such as 30 or 60 days after the date. This fundamentally misunderstands the nature of demand instruments. UCC Section 3-108A does not allow for the imposition of arbitrary timeframes onto demand obligations. Such an approach would violate the clear terms of the instrument and the governing law, potentially leading to premature or delayed enforcement actions. A further incorrect approach is to calculate maturity based on the date the holder receives the note, rather than the date it is issued or dated. While presentment is a necessary step for a holder to demand payment on a demand instrument, the maturity date itself is determined by the instrument's terms and the UCC's definition of demand instruments. The UCC focuses on the instrument's creation date for demand instruments, not the holder's subsequent possession date. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach negotiable instruments by first identifying the type of instrument, and then meticulously applying the relevant provisions of Alabama's UCC Article 3. For promissory notes, understanding the distinction between time instruments and demand instruments is paramount. When faced with a due-on-demand clause, the professional should immediately recall UCC Section 3-108A and recognize that the instrument is due immediately upon its date or issuance. This systematic approach, grounded in statutory interpretation, ensures accuracy and compliance.